What's good, everybody? It's Robo back with another video, and today I've got my Week 2 college football picks. Week 2 is another good one with a ton of games and a couple ranked matchups. If I happen to skip over a game, it's because there's not a line set at the time of making this video, but feel free to ask down in the comments my opinion if you want it. But before I get into everything, let me go ahead and recap how Week 1 went. Week 1 got off to a rough start with the weekday games, but a decent Saturday pushed us to an even record against the spread. We've seen everybody but Ball State in action now, and a lot of lines have adjusted. We've got a couple huge games to look forward to this week, so without further ado, let's get started in order with a couple Friday games to kick it off. BYU at SMU is an intriguing Friday night matchup. BYU holds a perfect record all-time against SMU, but SMU enters this one as 2-score favorites. In Week 1, the Cougars looked better than I had expected, especially offensively, with Jake Retzlaff throwing for 350 yards on a solid FCS team, which now brings a different outlook on this game compared to preseason expectations. SMU will run two quarterbacks again, as both played well last week, and the run game absolutely dominated Houston Christian. After the slow start to Nevada, it seems like this team has settled in quite well, and I think they'll pick up their first win over BYU as a program Friday, 34-20. Duke heads to Northwestern Friday night in what could be a really ugly football game. Duke struggled quite a bit on offense against Elon, and Northwestern managed just 13 points in their win over Miami, Ohio. Malik Murphy had a solid performance in Week 1, but up against a much stronger defense, will need to take care of the football to win on the road. I think there's a good chance this game ends up really low scoring and comes down to the last possessions, but up against a very small home field advantage, I like Murphy to find enough success throughout the air to come away with a win 20-17. Number 3, Texas at number 10, Michigan is a game of the week, and Fox's big noon kickoff Saturday. After a slow start, Texas absolutely dominated Colorado State, and while Michigan nearly covered in the end, the offense really struggled for the majority of the game against Fresno State, especially the offensive line. I expect Coach Moore to open the playbook up quite a bit if need be in this game, but quite simply, Michigan's chances are going to boil down to being able to run the ball. Texas' defensive strength is the secondary, and the Texas offense is going to find ways to score no matter how elite Michigan's defense is. So Michigan will need to match anything by doing what they do, and while I do expect them to find success eventually, I just don't trust the offense enough yet to pick them to win this game, but I do think they'll battle tight to the end because it is Michigan. I'm going to go with Texas, 24-17. Number 8, Penn State looked really impressive last week at West Virginia. I thought the game would be a lot closer than that, and there were some questionable moments, but they flat out controlled that game for most of it. They returned for the home opener this week against Bowling Green, who may be a contender in the MAC this season with some elite weapons in Terrion Stewart and Harold Fannin. But simply put, this game shouldn't be close, especially if Drew Aller looks as sharp as he did last week, and the defense continues to dominate on third down and create takeaways. I've got Penn State coming away with this one, 42-6. Arkansas heads to Oklahoma State Saturday after both teams impressed in Week 1. Oklahoma State taking care of the back-to-back FCS champs, and Arkansas putting on a clinic against Pine Bluff. Taylon Green brings an elite rushing dynamic to the offense that'll make this team tough to game plan for, but the Cowboy defense has some elite athletes across the field that can help slow down that attack. It's tough to get a great read after just 1 week, but I like Oklahoma State to take care of business again at home behind another big day from Ollie Gordon, 34-24. Kansas State is on the road this week at Tulane, with both teams coming off blowout wins in Week 1. Avery Johnson had a decent season debut, but will be up against a much tougher task this week, with Tulane's defense coming in a lot stronger than UT Martin. And on the other side, Darian Mensah had a super efficient debut, going for 200 yards on 12 attempts, and the Green Wave dominated on the ground, rushing for 240. This is a losable game for the Wildcats if Tulane's able to generate turnovers, but I think the dual threat ability of this offense will be too much for them, and I like Kansas State to win it by 2 scores, 34-20. Number 23, Georgia Tech heads to Syracuse after a 2-0 start. They're looking like a legitimate ACC contender right now, but this is a big test on the road this week. Syracuse looked solid in Week 1 with a 16-point win over Ohio behind a monster game from Kyle McCord throwing for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. Ohio is not necessarily an upper-tier MAC team this season, though, and ran all over the Orange defense. So this game probably comes down to how well Syracuse can adjust against a strong Tech rush offense, and if Georgia Tech's secondary can slow down Kyle McCord. I've gone back and forth on this one because I love how comfortable McCord looked last week, but I'm going to go with Tech surviving on the road, 28-24. Rutgers had an unbelievable cover last week against Howard after a relatively slow game where they led by just 10 at the half, but Kyle Monangai played an exceptional game as expected and will probably be the main source of offense once again this season for Rutgers. This week they host Akron, who could not move the ball whatsoever against an elite Ohio State defense, and although Rutgers is much different from the Buckeyes, I expect them to be better against the run this week and find similar success in shutting down the Zips offense, and the spread is definitely reachable, especially with some takeaways. Give me the Scarlet Knights 34-7. Pitt at Cincinnati is another tough game to pick. Eli Holstein looked great against Kent State and could be a legitimate answer for the questions around Pitt's offense, but I do think the fact that Kent State kept this game close for 3 quarters is a bad sign for that team. And on the other hand, Cincinnati genuinely struggled to put away Towson until the second half as well. However, Dante Corleone is back this week and should help with that defense a lot, and I think I can trust Brennan Sorsby at home more than a young Holstein making his first road start when the matchup is fairly even like these teams are. So I'm going to lean with Cincinnati in a really close one, 31-27. Memphis hosts Troy this week after a shutout win in Week 1 over North Alabama. And as we knew preseason and saw last week, this is not the usual Troy team who can take the best group of 5 teams to the brink on a weekly basis. A home loss to Nevada sums up what the expectations are of the season, and now heading to Memphis to face arguably the best team in the entire group of 5. I don't see this being close at all. Seth Hennigan should have another field day through the air, leading the Tigers to a 38-14 victory. FAU nearly pulled off a shocker Week 1 at Michigan State by completely shutting down the MSU offense and getting some help with targeting penalties, but ultimately they fell short and head back home to take on Army this week, who's coming off a near 400-yard day on the ground against Lehigh. Luckily for FAU, quarterback Cam Fancher is back practicing, so he's a go for this one, and he should have a bit better time through the air, but I think Army just looked much better last week, and I can't trust that Fancher is fully healthy, so give me Army by a field goal, 24-21 on the road. Notre Dame is up to number 5 in the rankings after a really impressive road win at Texas A&M. This week they head back home to face one of the better teams in the MAC in Northern Illinois. Notre Dame should be able to control this game from start to finish and could blow the doors off of this one, but coming off a win as big as last week at Kyle Field, it's hard not to think they could start slow against a solid NIU defense. I think this one could end up being a bit lower scoring, as NIU should struggle to move the ball against Notre Dame, and a slow start from the Irish would lead to that lower total. But I'm going to take Notre Dame big, but not to cover, 35-10. Utah hosts Baylor this week after a very strong Week 1 performance against Southern Utah. Cam Rising threw for 250 yards and 5 touchdowns on just 10 completions, and although Baylor had a similar result against Tarleton State, it was not as pretty as the score looked, with under 4 yards per carry and 2 interceptions by the offense. Simply put, I don't think they match up too well with Utah, and this should be a comfortable win for the Utes. I think we get another big day out of Cam Rising and Brant Keith, as Utah wins it 38-17. Iowa found an offense last week after a slow start, putting up 40 points and 250 yards through the air. And although it's just Illinois State, that is an achievement for the Hawkeyes, who will look to continue that momentum into next week as they host Iowa State. Now, despite beating North Dakota just 21-3 last week, this Iowa State team definitely has the talent to beat Iowa on the road. I really like this defense, and Rocco Becht was incredibly efficient through the air in Week 1, but Iowa's defense is one of the best in the country. It will make a super difficult task for the Cyclones to pull off. So trusting that strength, I like Iowa close, 20-17. Louisville looked incredible last week against Austin Peay with nearly 600 yards of offense, including 300 on the ground. From Tyler Shuck to true freshman Isaac Brown, this was an offensive clinic. And this week they'll host Jacksonville State, who look shockingly bad at home against Coastal Carolina. The quarterback situation is still horrendous, and they really struggle to stop Coastal all game long. Louisville is a much stronger opponent with a great defense, and it would take a massive difference for Jacksonville State to keep this one close. Give me the Cardinals to win and cover, 45-10. Auburn and Cal had 2 completely different season openers, with Cal struggling offensively with UC Davis, to Auburn putting up 73 in Alabama A&M behind a 300-yard 4-touchdown day from Peyton Thorne and his new receivers. I don't expect nearly the same result this week for the Tiger offense up against a much more formidable opponent, but based on how they looked, I think Auburn's in a good spot to win this one. Cal needs a much better day on offense, as rushing for less than 3 yards per carry is not going to get the job done. They'll need Jaden Ott to bring a couple big runs to stay in this game, and I trust his ability to do so. But regardless, I don't see Cal leaving Auburn with a win. I've got the Tigers 31-21. Kentucky takes on South Carolina this week in an early SEC matchup between 2 teams that had fairly opposite Week 1 results. Kentucky taking care of Southern Miss with dominant defense, and South Carolina surviving a scare from Old Dominion after a rough debut from Lenora Sellers. If Sellers struggles that heavily again, which is certainly possible against an elite Kentucky defense, I don't think South Carolina stands much of a chance in this game. But I do think we see some improvement with a game under his belt now, and Kentucky's offense should struggle at times in this one as well against a solid Gamecock defense. I'm expecting a low-scoring matchup regardless, but give me the Cats at home by a touchdown, 24-17. Michigan State was really underwhelming in Week 1, even with the low expectations. There were some issues I didn't think would be as bad as it looked, and now they head to Maryland, who looked much better than I expected. Aiden Childs is going to have to perform at a different level if the Spartans want to pick up a conference road win here. I think the defense may be good enough to get some stops, but if they aren't moving the ball well, Maryland may end up pulling away in this one. But I do expect a stronger performance from the entire offense as a whole. I just don't think this team is good enough to get it done, so give me Maryland to win it, 27-20. Washington hosts Eastern Michigan this week after a solid Week 1 performance out of both teams. Washington taking care of business against Weber State, and EMU taking down UMass on the road. This is obviously a one-sided matchup Washington should not struggle too much with, but I still have my doubts about this team in the long run, and Eastern's a team with a fair amount of experience. I think they find a way to put up some points here and cover that spread, but I've got Washington winning this one, 34-16. UMass looked pretty rough in their Week 1 home loss to Eastern Michigan, and now they hit the road to face a much tougher MAC team in Toledo. UMass could not stop Cole Snyder through the air and found little to no offense themselves. I think we see a big day out of Jerwan Newton and Jaquez Stewart for Toledo, and the Rockets defense gets several stops to pull away throughout the game. I like Toledo big, 38-13. North Carolina lost Max Johnson for the year and nearly fell to Minnesota last week at the last second, but they survived and returned to Chapel Hill to take on Charlotte. Connor Harrell only attempted 4 passes last week, so there isn't much to know about how well he can handle the offense. But regardless, Amarian Hampton is one of the best running backs in the country and was virtually unstoppable last week. I don't see Charlotte being able to slow him down at all, especially if Harrell's throwing it well. The UNC defense should dominate and help the Tar Heels win in blowout fashion, 34-9. Navy takes on Temple this week after a nice offensive day against Bucknell in Week 1, averaging 5 yards a carry and throwing for over 170 yards on the day. Temple may be a much better opponent, but like I said last week, they're one of the worst teams in the FBS this season in my opinion. Forrest Brock should have a much easier time against Navy rather than Oklahoma, but the offensive line and run game issues are not going to go away, and Navy has a strong enough defense to limit Temple offensively. I think Navy covers this one 34-17. We've got the I-35 rivalry this week with UTSA traveling over to Texas State carrying a 4-game win streak over the Bobcats. And this may be the most exciting matchup between the two teams to date, as I think both teams are contenders in their respective conferences. For UTSA, Owen McCown looked great Week 1 in the home win over Kennesaw State, but they really struggled to run the football, and Texas State's D-line has some legitimate talent. And although they only beat Lamar by 7 last week, they ran for over 5 yards a pop and threw for nearly 300 and racked up 7 sacks on the day. I think we see a cleaner performance, and Texas State wins a great game at home, 37-31. Number 6, Ole Miss looked flat out incredible last week in their 76-0 win over Furman, and they get another blowout opportunity this week against Middle Tennessee State, who honestly struggled against Tennessee Tech. This team has a few defensive playmakers, but I don't see how they'll be able to slow down the Rebel offense at all, or even score much for themselves. I think this one gets wrapped up fast, as Ole Miss is just way too loaded on both sides of the ball to not control this game. Give me Ole Miss 56-10. Virginia Tech had an extremely disappointing Week 1 performance at Vanderbilt. Not only did they fail to cover as 2 touchdown favorites, but they flat out lost in overtime. Expectations of this team took a big hit, and they are badly in need of a bounce-back game against Marshall. This is an obvious mismatch in talent, but Marshall rolled over Stony Brook last week, and Tech showed nothing that should warrant them being 3 touchdown favorites. And to top it off, while it's 2 different teams, Marshall beat Tech just last season. With that being said, Virginia Tech should win this game still, but I'm going to go with a 37-20 final. Central Michigan had one of the most dominant Week 1s, beating Central Connecticut 66-10 behind a 350-yard day from Joey Labus. We'll see if that level of play continues at Florida International this week. FIU's defense held Indiana to just 31 points and around 4 yards a carry, and I expect them to do a much better job against CMU than Central Connecticut did. Keon Jenkins is going to have to be a difference maker in this one, having only 120 yards last week, although as I mentioned before, I think Indiana is going to be a lot better than many expected this year. For this game, I could see it going either way depending on how different CMU looks, but I trust FIU's defense to keep them in the game long enough to give themselves a chance, so I'm going to take Central to escape with a close win though, 27-23. Old Dominion nearly left South Carolina with a big-time upset win last week and has a chance at another upset as home underdogs to East Carolina. Obviously, Jake Garcia has solid arm talent for ECU, but 3 picks against Norfolk State is not someone I want to put my trust in, especially in his first road start. Old Dominion definitely isn't a strong team by any means, but they've consistently looked good at home and taken some good teams to the brink in the past, and I'd be surprised if they weren't at least in this game until the end, but I think they get it done behind a better day from Grant Wilson and beat East Carolina 30-24. South Alabama and Ohio are both coming off Week 1 losses with serious defensive issues, and in similar ways with both teams being gashed through the air against solid passing attacks. The big difference though is where these teams found success offensively. Ohio ran for 250 yards on Syracuse with 200 coming from Anthony Tyus, where South Alabama showed their ability to throw the ball with Gio Lopez throwing for 430 yards on the day. South Alabama is a road team for this one, but holding North Texas to 3 yards a carry tells me they may be able to slow down that Ohio rushing attack. I'm not sure Ohio can do the same with Gio Lopez through the air, so I'm going to take the Jags close, 31-23. UCF takes on Sam Houston this week at home, and although Sam Houston just destroyed Rice on the road last week, I think UCF has the physicality to completely control this game. We saw the talent this offense has last week with over 450 rushing yards in the day. Of course, they'd love to see better days out of KJ Jefferson, but we've seen what he can do in the past, and after Sam Houston thumped Rice on the road last week, I doubt they'll be overlooking them here. And a good amount of that performance came from turnovers and big plays, which I don't think UCF is going to allow. So give me the Knights to win big this week, 41-13. Alabama is up to number 4 after a dominant Week 1 and gets a rematch of last year's game against South Florida, which Jalen Milroe was benched for and nearly ended in disaster. This year should be a different story though, as Milroe's fully established as one of the best in the country. But don't sleep on South Florida completely. Byron Brown is the real deal, and they've got some weapons. If they can generate some offense, I'd like them to be able to cover a spread this big. Alabama definitely has the talent to continue to roll, but I don't know if Brown's going to perform as poorly as TJ Finley did last week. And I just think South Florida is simply better than Western Kentucky. I'm going to go with Bama 45-17. Missouri manhandled Murray State last week and will look to continue the dominance this week against Buffalo, who I expected to struggle against Lafayette last week, but they came to play and really handled that one well. With that being said, though, Missouri is one of the 10 best teams in the country, and there is no way Buffalo can stop this offensive attack with Cook, Burden, Weiss, and that offensive line. Missouri pulled the starter shortly after halftime last week, and that could be the case again this time, as they're more than capable of getting close to covering by the half, giving Missouri with a 48-6 final. Illinois officially announced their first sellout crowd since 2016 for this weekend's matchup against number 19 Kansas under the lights, which brings a whole new excitement to a game that could be a great one. Illinois genuinely looked better than I expected week 1, although it was just Eastern Illinois, and Kansas comes in with some lofty expectations this season in the Big 12. For me, though, I still think this is Kansas' game to lose. I think they've got better talent on both sides of the ball, and I just don't think the Illini will have an answer for Daniels, Neal, and Grimm, especially considering how strong the Jayhawks are in the secondary if Illinois is forced to air it out late coming from behind. I think it could be close, but I like Kansas to win this one, 31-24. Virginia at Wake Forest is a super tough one for me. Both teams likely end up at the bottom of the ACC this season, and both come off decent wins over FCS programs. Both Hank Backmeyer and Anthony Calandria look sharp in their season debuts, and both offenses average around 6 yards a carry. I really think this game could come down to the turnover battle and could end up going either way, but the way Backmeyer played after Curran left early gives me some faith they can get it done at home under the lights. I'm going to roll with his level of experience in a matchup this even. Like I said, it could go either way, but I'll take Wake 31-27. Kennesaw State had a decent FBS debut last week considering what they were up against, covering the spread with the ease on the road at UTSA. And although they lost, it looked a lot better than some expected. They could not get anything going on the ground and really struggled against a solid defense, but they played well enough defensively to stay in the game. This week, they're at home against Louisiana, another tough test who may be just as good as UTSA, and comes off a dominant win over Grambling. I think anything over 2 touchdowns is worth taking for Kennesaw, though. First FBS game at home, and they clearly showed they can get stops, but I don't expect them to win this one, so give me Louisiana 30-21. San Jose State at Air Force is a tough read, and we'll learn a lot about these teams after this game. Both teams are playing so much production this offseason, and neither look great in week 1, but I think San Jose State performed a bit better than I expected. Sacramento State was not an easy opponent for them, and they struggled until a late turnover, but the fact Air Force couldn't find any success with the triple option and only put up 21 points on Merrimack tells me they're in for a rough go this year. I think Emmett Brown looked solid in his debut for the Spartans. I don't see Air Force shutting down the Brown to Nash connection, and I definitely don't trust their offense right now. So give me San Jose State outright 27-20. Nevada has been one of the early season surprises through 2 weeks, being projected bottom 2 in the Mountain West preseason to nearly upsetting SMU and then taking down Troy on the road last week. In week 2, they'll host Georgia Southern, who just put up a good fight against Boise State but got absolutely manhandled on the ground. This is a really tough game to pick, as I thought J.C. French looked great last week, and Nevada's gotten off to a really solid start. I'm going to trust Nevada to be able to score against a weak Eagle defense and get the job done at home close, 34-30. Arkansas State really underwhelmed in week 1, nearly falling to Central Arkansas before a last-second score, and they struggled to run the ball all game long. Kirk Francis and Tulsa come to town this week as simply a better opponent, and Jalen Rayner and company cannot play as poorly as they did last week if they want to stave off another upset. With that being said, I'm still not a fan of this Tulsa team, and I think the week 1 scare will wake up the Red Wolves quite a bit. With this line sitting at 7, I'm comfortable trusting them to bounce back, especially offensively. I've got Arkansas State 38-27. UAB at UL Monroe has an interesting storyline to this matchup. Current ULM coach Bryant Vincent was the interim head coach at UAB in 2022, and although he had a ton of player support, they selected Trent Dilfer over him, which led to his departure and eventual hire this offseason at ULM. So there's no doubt he'll have his guys ready to go this week and be pumped up for it, but I don't think they have the talent to beat UAB still. Jacob Zeno is one of the better group of 5 quarterbacks, and they look solid in week 1 win over Elkhorn State. I would be shocked if UAB didn't leave this one with a win, but I'll ride with ULM keeping it a game for a while, so give me UAB by 10, 34-24. Western Michigan heads to number 2 Ohio State after nearly pulling off a shocker at Wisconsin last week before a couple late scores. But quite simply, this Buckeye team is a lot different than that Wisconsin one, and they got on a roll as the game went on last week against Akron and should continue that momentum here. There are some questions about the offensive line and consistency within the offense, but I really think Ohio State picks up another blowout win this week behind a stronger offensive showing across the board and another elite defensive performance. Give me the Buckeyes 45-3. Number 14, Tennessee takes on number 24, NC State from somewhat neutral territory in Charlotte, North Carolina Saturday night. And I'm excited for this game as I think we see an NC State bounce back after a slow start week 1 that almost had them on upset alert against Western Carolina. And simply put, Nico and Tennessee look fantastic against Chattanooga. This should be a great game as both teams can run the football, have stellar playmakers, and quarterbacks that they trust. But I think Tennessee has the edge on the defensive side of the ball and might even have an edge at quarterback with the young gun and Nico. This should be a great game, but I'm taking Tennessee to win a close one, 30-27. Colorado heads out to Nebraska in a rematch of last season's Week 2 game. This is a former rivalry matchup, and some things have been said early this week on about it. Dylan Raiola looked really solid in his debut against UTEP, but Colorado is going to be a much different challenge. They've got the talent to match any offensive success the Huskers have, so this game will need to be won defensively. I think with the talent they have, Nebraska has a strong chance to get the stops they need to keep a lead, and the crowd's going to be absolutely bumping. I like Colorado to generate enough offense to push it down to the wire, though, but I'm going to take Nebraska at home, 27-24. Jackson Arnold had a solid debut for Oklahoma last week, throwing for 140 yards and 4 touchdowns against Temple. And this week, the Sooners will host Houston, who's coming off a stomping in their own stadium by UNLV. The Rebels are a Group of 5 contender, but that game was not even close, and I think that's telling for how the Cougar season's going to go. Even without Jaleel Farouk, the Sooners have enough depth at receiver to where I don't see them missing a beat without him, and they can roll over Houston this week. I'm going to go with a 42-10 final. Clemson got absolutely manhandled by Georgia last week, finding little to no offensive success whatsoever, and now look to rebound as they return home to take on Appalachian State, a team they definitely should beat, but look strong enough to be in the thick of the Sun Belt title race this season. Joey Aguilar is a really solid quarterback, and they've got a decent ground game to complement him, but this Clemson defense is still one of the better units in the country and should be able to control the majority of the game. However, I don't see Clemson handling this game with ease still, as they have their own issues to figure out, and I expect App State to find some offense at some point, so give me Clemson 34-20. Oregon had one of the most disappointing performances of Week 1, beating Idaho by just 10 points and getting beat consistently in the trenches. It was genuinely a shocking game to me, as I think we all know the kind of talent Oregon has. Boise State comes to town this week, and Oregon's going to have to play a lot better football. Ashton Jeanty ran for over 250 yards and 6 touchdowns in the opener, and is an absolute monster with the football. If they don't come to play again, he could put the Ducks on upset alert, but I would be very surprised if there wasn't some form of a bounce back here. I like Oregon by 20+, 41-20. Texas Tech travels up to Washington State Saturday night in what should be a really fun game. Two offenses that put up 52 and 70 last week respectively, and two defenses that looked abysmal, with Tech giving up 51 to Abilene Christian in overtime, and Washington State allowing 30 to Portland State. This should be another high-scoring game, but I expect Texas Tech to play a much better game after a scare that big. This one is really a toss-up for me, as I like Baron Morton and the Texas Tech playmakers, but I'll roll with the Cougar offense being able to continue their success under the lights at home. Fading that Tech defense, I'll go 38-35 Washington State. Liberty's on the road at New Mexico State this week, and the spread's about right for what I'm expecting. New Mexico State's basically going through a complete rebuild and looked awful Week 1, nearly falling to Southeast Missouri State at home. Liberty has some elite talent on offense, and they really came on in the second half last week to blow out Campbell after a slow start. Personally, I'm not a fan of this spread, as Liberty's a much better team, but getting over 3 scores on the road is a lot. If Campbell can do it, I'd trust New Mexico State to find a way to get some points on the board. I'll go 37-17 Liberty. Both Arizona State and Mississippi State had really impressive Week 1 wins, with Arizona State's coming over Wyoming 48-7. And although this Wyoming team has certainly taken a step back, Sam Leavitt looked really good in his debut for the Sun Devils, and the offense was really balanced. Defensively, they allowed just 1.3 yards per carry to a team that really likes to run the football. And on the other side, Blake Shapen dominated the Eastern Kentucky defense, going for nearly 300 total yards and 4 touchdowns for Mississippi State. But a lot of that offense came on big plays, and they kind of struggled to run the football throughout the night. I think this one could go either way, but I'm trusting Arizona State to continue what I saw in Week 1. I'll go 31-23 final. San Diego State hosts Oregon State with a chance for Danny O'Neal to really establish himself as a future top quarterback in the Group of 5. The true freshman looked sharp in his debut, throwing for 200 yards against Texas A&M Commerce, but now will face a much tougher task with Oregon State, who doesn't really have many expectations for the season, but will expect to win this game. Offensively, I love the rushing duo with Jam Griffin and Anthony Hankerson, and although the Beavers could be a bit one-dimensional, I trust him to find more success than a true freshman in his first big test. So give me Oregon State to come out on top on this one, 31-24. USC is up to number 13 in the AP poll after a big-time win Sunday night against LSU in Vegas, and they return for their home opener against Utah State in the final game of the week. Simply put, they looked really improved defensively against LSU, and Miller Moss put on a show, throwing all over the LSU defense. The question for this matchup will be if they can stay locked in, or if a win that big could play a role in a slower start this week. Utah State may not be a great team, but I think they're more than capable of scoring if USC isn't on their game. And with the spread up over 4 touchdowns, I'll side with them scoring just enough to stay within that threshold. Give me USC 45-20. That's it for my Week 2 picks. Let me know your thoughts, upset predictions, and which games you're looking forward to most this week down in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.